with so many providers out there, it can be tough to tell what's truly a professional pen test versus what's just a glorified vulnerability scan.
We want things fast. We want things easy. We want things cheap. Automation allows us to do a lot more quickly. The provider's belief of what is proper, whether it's correct or not, may not mesh with what the client actually needs.
Why do you think over-reliance on automation is such a problem?
The first part of the pen test is really the scoping piece. This starts out at home, if you will. If the client doesn't know exactly what they want, they can't express that to the provider.
Penetration testing isn't just another compliance requirement. It's about trust, transparency, and making sure you're getting real value from your investment. Welcome to the MainNerve Cybersecurity Podcast, where we cut through the noise and talk about what actually matters when it comes to protecting your business and supporting your clients. Today's question comes straight from the real world. Is our pen test provider's approach normal, or are we getting shortchanged? This comes directly from a Reddit thread in subreddit pen testing. It's a fair concern with so many providers out there. It can be tough to tell what's truly a professional pen test versus what's just a glorified vulnerability scan. Let's break down what normal should really mean, the red flags to watch for, and why it matters. Now, John, I know we've talked a lot about pen tests versus vulnerability scans. We've definitely, I feel like, almost beaten that horse to death. What does the life cycle of a proper penetration test actually look like?
Well, I would say that a proper penetration test, the life cycle actually starts before you identify who's going to be performing the pen test for you. You have to, the first part of the pen test is really the scoping piece. This starts out at home, if you will. In your office, determining why do you need to pen test, what areas do you need to have pen tested, and what methodology or what approach do you want to have that pen test performed utilizing, right? So that sets your expectations for what you want to get out of the pen test, and that it gives you the ability when you are talking to potential providers to say, this is what I want versus I just want a pen test and I leave it up to you to define that in your own head and then just do it for me, right? So the scoping piece is the beginning. And then once that's been defined for the client internally, they then reach out to a penetration testing organization and say, hey, we want to have a pen test. This is our expectation. This is what we want. And then pass that on to the provider, right? So then the provider would then look at what the client is asking for. They would define their own scope, get back with the client, say, these are the things that we're going to perform. Here's how we're going to perform them. This is the methodology we're going to use. And this is how long it's going to take us to perform those tests. Once that's done, they step into the recon phase or the enumeration phase, where they're just exploring the client's network or application, depending on the type of test that it is. Once they've done the exploration phase and they've pretty much mapped out what it looks like, depending upon the type of test, they'll either step into to a more defined enumeration where they're determining what the workflow looks like, if it's a web application, or identifying any other underlying aspects of the network, the type of authentication mechanisms that are being used, etc. Then identify any potential avenues of attack, perform exploitation with the approval of the client. Once the exploitation is performed and they've gained the access, they would then, depending upon the scoping that was defined before, step into a post-exploitation phase where they're either just recording what they did and reporting that back to the client, or taking that next step to show how much potential damage could have occurred had this been a malicious exploitation versus just a regular exploitation. Once that phase is done, then they would go into the reporting phase, where they're going to draft up the report. They should give you an executive summary that makes things simple for your C-suite to understand, and then give you a more technical one that allows for the people that are going to do the fixes to know exactly where they need to go to make those fixes. Once those fixes are made, they then reach back out to you again and say, hey, we've got it fixed. Your provider should then reach out to you and say, well, how did you fix them? Record that information and then do an analysis internally rather quickly just to make sure that what you're suggesting the fixes are actually would fix it, and then that there was no confusion with what the actual exploitation risk was, and then perform a test on those findings to make sure that they were actually mitigated.
And in your opinion, why does scoping and goal setting matter so much upfront?
Well, like I said before, if you don't know, and when I say you in this case, I mean the client, if the client doesn't know exactly what they want, they can't express that to the provider. The provider can say, standard practices to perform this, this, and this, but that may not be what you want. Or the provider's belief of what is proper, whether it's correct or not, may not mesh with what the client actually needs. For example, you might get a provider that thinks that a automated bone scan is all you need, right? They may call it a pen test. They may call it an automated pen test. But if in the beginning for the client, if they haven't evaluated everything about what they want to test and then how they want it tested, then they can't convey that to the provider. On the provider side of the fence, the provider needs to know what the client wants to have tested, how they want it tested, and to what extent they want it tested in order to be able to provide the client with a good product. So if you aren't spending a good amount of time determining that overall um, aspect of the client's network or the client's web application or their mobile application, then you can't be certain that you're providing them with a quality test. You might get lucky and do exactly what they want, but at the same time, you might give them something that they are like, this doesn't make any sense to me.
So, an analogy might be like taking your car in for an oil change. And if you don't really specify that's what you're there for, they might do a big inspection and say, oh, well, you need to change this and the headlights out and this and this and this and this and this.
So in that aspect, would be you would be getting overcharged because you'd be doing more than what you originally wanted. Another would be if you go in and you say, "Hey, I want you to give me a inspection on my car," right? And they go in and they check the the headlights work, the tail lights work, the wipers work, um, your brakes work, brake lights work. Um, the oil appears to be fine on the dipstick measure, and that's all they do. But you were expecting them to also check your brake pads, your disc rotors, your transmission fluid, and all those other things, because you think that's what's in an inspection. Um, but their definition of an inspection was purely external, and yours is a little bit more safety and in depth. But yeah, so that's a great example of a or analogy of what needs to be looked at.
And you talked a bit about reconnaissance, exploitation, and post exploitation. I think most people kind of have an understanding of that, but can you give a couple of examples of what the difference is between reconnaissance and exploitation?
It's kind of hard to exploit something if you don't know it's there, right? So the reconnaissance phase could be renamed to an enumeration phase where you're just basically going in and taking inventory of everything, right? But if you don't know you have something sitting on the shelf, then you can't really go and interact with it because you don't know it's there. So if you skip that recon phase, then you go straight to exploitation, then you're throwing a whole bunch of stuff at things that may or may not exist. So the recon phase allows you to map out everything, inventory everything, potentially find things you didn't know were there because 6 years ago, some IT guy set up a little server that is doing syslog data analysis and hasn't been touched in 6 years because that guy did it as a project. and moved on to another company, and is still sitting there, but he didn't properly record it. So the reconnaissance phase would help you potentially identify that that system was there, um, where if you skip that phase and go straight to the exploitation phase, you can only go based off of what the client tells you exists.
So let's talk a little bit about red flags that might suggest a provider is cutting corners. In your opinion, what are some common warning signs that a provider isn't delivering a true pen test?
If you get a report and the report is, I guess it's hard to say that you would see it as canned if you didn't look at reports on a regular basis, but if you look at a report and the first part of the report is generic, it doesn't apply to your company directly. Your name is mentioned in it, but it's mentioned in a very obvious place, so it's like it's automated. And then you get to the technical portion of the report, and it's got 40,000 findings in it, right? A penetration test in most cases should not have any findings in it that are specifically related to a bone scan, right? We'll include some of the what we call problem children in ours. Like for example, TLS 1.1. I think that it was superseded in like 2008 or something like that, maybe 2018. I can never remember. It was superseded a long time ago. It's been known to have issues. Um, it's decades old, but companies still have it. So we'll include that in a report and say, hey, by the way, you need to get these things fixed because it's just it's good hygiene to clear out that stuff that doesn't need to be used. None of the modern browsers have a problem using TLS 1.2 or 1.3 even. Even HTTP2, and I know I'm just throwing out numbers for you, but those we might include those in a report, but we're not going to include, potential vulnerability of CVE blah, CVE blah, CVE blah. If it looks like they took a vulnerability scan report, like from say Nessus or Qualys or God forbid just Greenbone by itself, right? And they threw it into there's nothing wrong with Greenbone, but it is community driven and it is expected that you're going to go in and put your own testing in there and not just deal with it before. But if that's all that's in there, then you have to worry, okay, are they using this as filler because they didn't do anything else? Or it's possible they may include them in there, and then you may find later on they've got all kinds of stuff that they did that is actually a penetration test. But it's hard to tell because they've inundated you with so much extra superfluous data that it's hard to find the meat in the report. So I would consider that to be a big red flag, right? Not to say that that it's absolutely a deal breaker, but it's a good indicator that there's a problem. If they put in the report, hey, here's a finding, we didn't test it, we didn't ask you if you wanted to have it tested, you should probably go and fix it, right? But they don't say anything about, okay, well, we found it, we ran these tests, this is what we identified, here's how it could potentially be a problem for you, and here's what we consider the risk value to be. Then again, it still could just be an automated scan. It could still just be an automated scan, and they haven't done any real work on it. Another one is communication, right? So for us, when we perform a penetration test within the rules of engagement, we will give you a direct line to the tester, both phone number and email. Our tester, usually 30 minutes before the penetration test starts, will send an email saying, hey, I'm about to start testing in about 30 minutes. It might be an hour before, but it's never less than 30 minutes. And then if the client wants to say, hey, hold on a minute, I forgot we were doing this test today. We just had a problem. We need to wait. They can send an email directly to the tester and everything pauses. There's no delay between them notifying the project manager reading the email, then contacting the tester to say, hey, stop. It's usually within a minute or two, testing can stop or be prevented from starting, right? If the tester finds a vulnerability, the tester would then notify the client that says, hey, I found XYZ. I'd like to be able to validate it. Here are the risks to me performing this particular exploitation, if there are any. Do I have your permission? And then the client says yes or no. If the client says yes, we perform it, and then we let the client know what was going on. It goes in the report. If you get a tester and you say, hey, we're going to start testing on the 4th. Today is the 1st. We're going to start testing on the 4th. Testing will end on the 6th, right? Or the 14th, or however big the project is. And that's the last thing you hear until a report shows up in your mailbox. There's a problem, right? Because when you're dealing with performing tests against somebody's network, there's always the potential that something's going to go wrong. We tested a client at one point where they had a really old, I don't remember if it was Cisco or Juniper or what. They had a really old layer 2 equipment, and one packet shut down the whole system because the frame was either too large or it had a window size that wasn't right. I don't remember the details, but if you have a client and you don't tell them ahead of time, I'm going to test on XYZ date, and then I reach out to you to say I'm now testing, and they don't have the ability to communicate with you directly, you could shut down their network, and now there's no interaction. Your clients are actually sitting there going, oh my God, everything went down. And unless that one person who knew about the pen test, in cases where there's only the one, knows about the pen test, then until they get brought into the loop, everybody's chasing their tail, right? Because you said we're going to test in 4 days, and then 4 days later you're testing and everybody's off doing their own thing, and there was no reminder for it. So, and that's just one example of how things can go wrong. And if you're not communicating on a regular basis to say, hey, this is what we're doing, then it can cause problems.
All right. So, why do you think over reliance on automation is such a problem?
We want things fast. We want things easy. We want things cheap. The old adage, you can pick two, right? You can have it fast and easy, but you can't have it cheap, or you can have it fast and cheap, but it won't be easy or good, or whatever the phrasing is on that. Automation allows us to do a lot more quickly, right? From the provider perspective, I could perform 100, 200 automated bone scans in a day. That's a lot of money I could bring in. And I can do that without having to have any highly trained individuals to do it, right? So I can bring on some lower level, brand new at the game, so to speak, individuals, and allow them to perform scans quickly. The client gets results quickly, and the client gets a lot of results in some cases. If they're doing bone scans on a regular basis, eventually those reports are going to look like, the same 3 items are going to show up all the time because they're just something that can't be fixed or isn't exactly relevant to the client. But because of the fact that it's quick and it's fast and it's easy, we have a tendency to gravitate towards it, especially because it is less expensive to do a bone scan than it is to have an expert take a look at your network and determine where the security holes are.
We did talk a little bit about the communication aspect, but I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about how we handle when a vulnerability is discovered and they want to exploit it.
So I alluded to it earlier. When a tester finds a vulnerability, depending upon the severity of it, if it's a critical finding, an email goes out to say, "Hey, I've got a critical vulnerability issue." You'll receive a link to download the details regarding that, and then they'll get what we call a quick and dirty, um, not even formatted really. It's just a Word document that's got screenshots and some notes from the tester for them to immediately take a look at and evaluate it, right? So let's say it's an SQL injection vulnerability that grants the, well, at that point, they wouldn't even know if it um, granted admin privileges. So they find an SQL vulnerability, right? They notify the client of that and they say, hey, we'd like to um, perform an exploitation against this. What that involves is we're going to be sending specially crafted queries to the system in order to see if it will allow us to execute either data dumps or commands on the system itself. Here are the risks that are associated with that. Um, Here's how we're going to mitigate some of those risks to prevent any damage to your system. Um, how would you like us to proceed? If we're in a non-production environment, say a dev environment or something like that, usually the client will be like, "Yeah, go ahead. Let's see what you got." And then the tester would then perform their exploitations based upon what they've already educated the client about to say, "Hey, these are the things that we're going to do." And then if they're successful and they identify, say, for example, that they do have admin privileges on the local machine because the SQL admin was also a local admin, then they would notify them that this is now a critical vulnerability and it needs to be patched immediately. And then they would give the client the opportunity to say, hey, okay, we're going to pause testing while we fix this now, right? Um, if it's just a regular vulnerability, the key factors that are weighed out that the tester is going to notify the client of are things like, will it cause a blue screen, a black screen, a reboot? Will it crash my server that make it never come up again? All of those things that could potentially happen because the exploit is not totally clean, right? So if there's a vulnerability and the vulnerability, 4 times out of 10, you run the vulnerability and it works perfectly and flawlessly. It finds the exact section of the buffer that it's supposed to grab and does exactly what it's supposed to do. But the other 6 out of 10 times, it misses that and causes a crash or a seg fault or a blue screen. I think Windows is now calling it a black screen. Um, this information has to be conveyed to the client because the client needs to be able to make an educated decision on, do we want to exploit this or do we want to just go in and fix it?
Thank you for that. Moving on to our, well, maybe not our reports, but a penetration test report and findings. Why might an external penetration test come back with only a handful of findings?
So with external penetration tests, that's the hard outer shell, right? It's the easiest thing to protect because you can just say, I'm not going to listen to you on that port, right? Um, it's the fewest number of services that are exposed. So, for example, you have a company and they have a firewall, and in their DMZ they have a web server, and that's the only thing they're sharing out with the world is just that web server. It's real easy to constantly maintain the services and make sure they're up to date. It's easy to harden that to say the only function that you can do is to come in here and ask for this one page. Or there's a TCP wrapper type thing that you can do within a web server that says if you're coming from this IP address, then you get nothing. Or if you're not coming from this IP address, you get nothing. You can set the firewall up to say, hey, I'm only going to let you talk to me if you're coming from XYZ IP address. And even then, I'll only let you talk to me on this one IP address or this one port. So it's real easy to create this big wall around your network and say, only a few of you shall pass, right? So if you're doing your due diligence on a regular basis and keeping security in the forefront of your mind, there is not a whole lot that a external entity can do with your network if you're doing your due diligence. So if you are doing your due diligence, you should expect to get a minimal report. And in that minimal report, it should show these are all the things we tried to do. You were great at all of these things. This one thing you might want to look at fixing, but we tried all of this. Here's every little thing we did, and it didn't work. All right. So that gives the client the confidence that you performed a penetration test, you followed the methodology, and it's not just an assumption, hey, this is the methodology we're following, and then you go in and you write your report. You let the client know we did all these things. You did everything you're supposed to do. So this report, although blank, is a good thing. This is you did what you were supposed to do. We tried to get through. We used all these methods. You blocked us from all of these methods. So this is a good on you. It's a kudos to the client that they did what they were supposed to. But what the client sees is I got a report. I just paid X amount of dollars for 7 pages that say nothing, right? So they feel like they're not getting anything out of it, out of the report, right? They feel like you didn't do anything. I could have done this at home. I could have run Nmap and walked away. I mean, you could have, but would you have known what you were looking at, right? Would you have known with the Nmap report, now you need to go and, or the results from Nmap, now you need to go and run these tools to see if there were any potential holes. So can a short report be valuable? It can. Usually after several years of performing penetration testing and proving that you have a sturdy and mature security posture, that report is just one more finding to say, hey, you're still doing what you're supposed to be doing. And occasionally, a new vulnerability will pop up in between, and the tester will identify it. They'll put it in the report, and you'll be like, oh, cool. Now I only have to fix this one thing, and I'm back to where I was before.
So the question is, we have a number of clients who obviously are getting a great report because they're locked down. A lot of the newer firewalls are, they're just more secure because of everything that we know. And like you said, the teams are working hard. They're making sure that ports are not available when they shouldn't be. And so they're getting very minimal reports. But my question is should we be taking a different perspective then? Should we be looking at things instead of saying, oh, well, an external's fine, you're fine? Should we be doing something else?
So then we go back to scoping, right? Is it a good idea once you've gotten the perimeter fixed to start stepping into more detailed testing or different avenues of testing? Is how I'm understanding the question, or at least the direction I'm going to come from when I answer the question. The answer to that is always yes, right? If when you, let's say you walk into a property, looking at this from a physical perspective, you just inherited a property. The first things you want to do are check the locks on the doors, check the locks on the windows, check the lock on the garage, check the roof, right? Your outer shell is the first thing that you want to assess to make sure that everything is working. Once that's done, the next step is to check the inside, right? Make sure that all the doors work properly on the inside. Make sure that the water flows the way it's supposed to, that the toilets don't constantly run because the seal is busted, or there's an outlet that doesn't work, or there's a gasket on a gas feeder line or something, right? Making up stuff because I'm not a maintenance guy. I don't know for sure, but Not from that perspective. I'll look at your house and go, oh yeah, you got a pretty cool thing there, but that's about it. Um, Anyway, so the concept of you fix something, and once you've got it sturdily fixed, you occasionally go back out and check to make sure that everything is still good. But now you have time to go and start assessing other things, right? So, in the sense of a penetration test, once you've got that outer shell taken care of, and you've pretty much got it on a cycle, every year you're going in and making sure that things are still good and nothing has been modified or changed on that front. You can now start put it more towards taking care of the inside of the house, right? What happens if somebody emails one of your employees and they click on a link, right? And now that person has access to their machine. What can happen from there? Can they get any further? Or you got a guy who's really bold and he walks in and he's got a modified Nintendo Switch or some other kind of gaming system, and he's just sitting there in your office like he's waiting for somebody. Meanwhile, he's just hacking away at the Wi-Fi, or you can't see it because he's got this cable that's running behind him to an open jack that's in the wall because you're not running MAC protections on the Ethernet ports at your switches, and he's exploiting your network, right? Um, there's all kinds of things that you can go to once you've got that hard outer share handled, right? Something that kind of sidestepping, but something that clients tend to neglect as well is they will provide you with a network from the outside to say, hey, see what you can do. And there's a firewall in place. But what they don't tell us is that, oh, by the way, we have port 443 and 22 open with this one client over in 2 states over, right? So their IP address is allowed to communicate on those ports. So that would be a step where the next step is, okay, my firewall works. It prevents the average Joe in their mama's basement or their grandpa's attic or whatever, stereotypical trope you can come up with for a hacker eating hot pockets and hacking away in 3 seconds or less, whatever the movie's got you doing now. Once you've got that part set, the next piece for that would be, let's look at what we're allowing in that isn't to everybody else, and let's assess those as well. Because what happens if your client that is 3 states over gets hacked, right? Somebody hacks into them. Now they have that avenue of attack to you, right? So if you're not testing and checking that on a regular basis, you could end up with an SSH server that is 5 years old and full of holes. And then these people find out, oh, by the way, this guy has SSH capability to this computer over here, and then just follow that path right down. So that would be another aspect of once you get that hard outer share taken care of, you then evaluate how you're sharing with other external sources. I think I went roundabout in circles again, but basically, there's absolutely every reason to continue to explore other avenues of potential exploitation within your network. If you have the money, do it all at once. Great, do it all at once. But if you don't have the money to do that, get that hard outer shell figured out, then pick the next step, test that, pick the next step, test that, and eventually you have a robust system and you just cycle through testing everything on a regular basis and you feel more confident that you are secure.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we might have as a culture overall we'll have to look at in the future is a lot of the laws that are in place right now that require pen testing, like the New York one, DFS, I think it is, PCI, certain ones require penetration testing, but I think we're going to have to get a little more specific and start looking at some of the other things involved, like whether it's internal testing or doing some phishing tests here and there to make sure that everything is up to snuff as opposed to just focusing on that external aspect.
Another thing about that, the you have these compliance standards that say you need to have a pen test, but the compliance standard itself does not define what they consider to be a pen test. And so that causes problems and confusions as well. So I would agree that not only do we need to make things clear, but we need for the compliance requirements to be clearly defined as to what they expect to happen. Because we'll get a client call us and they'll say, "Hey, I need a pen test." Okay, for this, it's always for compliance. Okay, what's the compliance requirement? And they're like, "Oh, PCI," and then we're like, "Okay, so now we know something, right? We know the things that PCI cares about for their testing, but it may come back and say some other compliance standard that doesn't have a clearly defined definition of what a pen test is. They're just like, "Oh, you just need to have a pen test." Last year we did an automated one. This year we'd like to do, a manual one, and it's hard to tell what the actual requirement is for them.
Yeah. I know that when I was doing the HIPAA risk assessments for a while there, I had specifically reached out to the Office for Civil Rights to get clarification on whether or not penetration testing was a requirement, and they wouldn't even tell me. The statutes specifically state that you have to do anything and everything possible. So that could mean doing a pen test. It might mean not doing a pen test. It's very unclear. And I understand the reasoning for it. They wanted to make sure that the smaller entities can afford to do a lot of the work necessary to protect patient information. But at the same time, I think that they're doing a disservice to all of those entities and the patients when they're not a little more clear on that.
And the pessimist side of me thinks that it's also an aspect of if they leave it vague enough that you just have to do everything possible. When they come after you for a fine violation, then they have all this wiggle room because, oh, this was possible, but you didn't do it. Instead of clearly stating this, and this, so that you know whether or not you're compliant.
Yeah, it makes it difficult. So, talking about budgets, and the fact that smaller entities probably have a much smaller budget than the larger entities, why would you say that a scan based engagement only it might be a waste of money?
So I guess first thing we would do is define, um, instead of saying waste of money, I would say the the least effective use of your money. Because you perform a bone scan, you're going to get something out of it, right? But it's not giving you anything more than maybe a false sense of security. Because all you're knowing now is that you've now gone through and identified all the software that you have on your system that there's a potential fix for, or there's a security fix for. And some of those security fixes may not even apply to the system that you have. Linux is a perfect example of this. Debian and Ubuntu, Red Hat, I think, does it as well. Um, they won't, they do what's called backporting. They won't fix with a new update, they will patch the old update. And the reason they do that is because they know that there's people out there who have built a product on top of whatever application they have, and the functionality that is capable within that system, right? So if they just upgrade it, then in order to fix the security hole, they could potentially break whatever the underlying capability is that the software on top was utilizing. So what they do instead is just patch it. But the current way that Nessus and Tenable and all of them are doing their scans is they look at the server value of a particular application and they match it, right? But they don't have like a necessarily an updated database that says, well, this particular one is patched if it has this dash 104 on the end or whatever to that vulnerability. So you would end up with just a report that's full of what we call false positives because you do have everything updated, but because of the fact of the way that the scans are being performed, you end up with stuff that doesn't, it's a vulnerability that doesn't exist. Whereas with an actual penetration test, the tester would then attempt to exploit that vulnerability, would be unsuccessful because it has been patched, and it wouldn't show up in the report because it's been patched. So it's not the best use of your money to just have vuln scans performed. Vuln scans are great for, I don't have a lot of time, I don't have a lot of money, I need to know what I look like and get as much of the low-hanging fruit out of the way as quickly as possible, right? Um, it's also really good for, I want to make sure on a regular basis that we're going through and we're patching everything that needs to be patched. And so it has its little niche that it fits in. But if it's all you're doing, then eventually you're just going to be throwing good money at bad investment.
So, going back to kind of the beginning where we were talking about what is normal and what isn't normal, um, when a client asks, "Is this normal?" what's the right answer? What does that look like?
If a client asks if something is normal, I mean, our automatic response would be, yeah, that's exactly what we do. We do what's normal. If they're asking me about something that I'm doing, then my opinion is always going to be, yes, it's normal. This is the way you're supposed to do it. Because, of course, we think we're right. Why else wouldn't we be telling you that we're right? The key difference is being able to back up our statement with proven methodologies to say, this is what we're doing. This is what the methodology, the industry standard recommended methodology is. And you can see how they blend perfectly. So yes, this is normal. If they come back to me and they say, hey, is this normal that, in the case of the Reddit that we're talking about, if I remember correctly, they just felt like they were just getting a bunch of scans. There was nobody talking, hours and hours of scanning and nothing else, right? Can that be normal? It can be. There are some key aspects of the way that networks work that a network nmap scan could take you days to perform because of timeouts and things like that that occur depending upon how you write your nmap, right? So there are things you can do when you're running an nmap scan to reduce that time cost. If you just run nmap by itself and you just leave it alone, then chances are you're going to get it's going to take you forever to enumerate a network. But if you polish your nmap command and you take advantage of the use of timeouts and the size of your groups of networks the groups of hosts that you're scanning, the number of ports that you're scanning, and then the way that you're approaching those ports, most common to the least common, you can find ways to reduce that stuff. What can happen where people are like, oh, this doesn't seem like it's normal. And I hesitate to say that what another person is doing is or isn't normal because I don't know their approach internally, right? So you've got a company, they're a pen testing company. They have a bench of testers and they offload some of the mundane labor to the beginning of the project, right? So the person who's doing that piece, all they're doing is typing in the IP addresses that are in scope and into a script and hitting a button, and all the enumeration is occurring at that point, right? And then once that enumeration piece is done, they would then package it up, hand it to the tester, and the tester would then take it and evaluate it to make sure that what they need is in there. If it's not, then they kick it back and say, I need you to redo it with this or that or the other. But if everything they need is there, then they would then take that data and start performing what we would consider the actual penetration test. So could it be normal that that they spend 7 days performing scans? It could be. If they're running the same scan over and over and over again, That's not normal. That's indicative of they have run a scan not knowing what the tool does or what the scan does. They got results they didn't like. And so they're rerunning the same scan, maybe with a slight difference of flag. So they're experimenting basically on your network. That would be a red flag to me, right? The same packets going over and over and over again. That's not how you're supposed to do it.
Another thing that came up in that post, it was kind of unusual. I guess the boss didn't really trust the pen testing company, so he wanted one of his employees to kind of watch to see what they were doing. Is so going reversing it is, we've been talking about what we do. All pen testing is normal, this kind of thing. Is it normal for clients to watch what we do on the back end there?
Most clients don't. It's kind of like watching grass grow. It's extremely boring. It's nothing like in the movies. There's a lot of, I run a scan, I take a look at the results, I go off and I do a little research, maybe spin up my own little VM, install the software, run a couple of tests to see what's going on in the back end when something happens, turn around and come back and then try that same approach on the client's system. Any penetration testing company with that is a valid testing company should be willing to allow a client to watch. They should be willing to give the client the opportunity to get that warm fuzzy that something is going on. However, if a tester is constantly having to explain what they're doing while they're doing it to the client, that's going to extend the amount of time it takes to perform a test. And if that's the case, that's great, but the client needs to pay for that extra time. If this isn't a teaching moment, it's a penetration testing, I want to assess your system. And some testers, they get into the flow and they're just going at it. And if they have to stop to say, hey, by the way, this is why I'm doing this. Now that's a problem, right? Could you maybe change that up and you maybe make a video, right? So you're like, okay, here's a video of me performing XYZ test and the results are here, right? So some companies will do that with the report to show, here's how you go about accomplishing this exploit. So now you know what we did and how we got the results back, and you don't have to sit there and go back and forth saying you can't replicate it. So is it normal for a client to say, I want to watch? It is not typical, right? It's not to say that you're weird because you want to. You're spending a large amount of money on a product that you want to have the confidence that the product is being done. But if you're going to do that, you need to know what you're looking at. So if you sit down and you watch somebody perform an Nmap scan, there's a lot of wait, right? I type in the command, I hit the button, and now I'm just waiting for this thing to do whatever it is it's doing. Chances are I'm not even at the screen anymore. I've rotated to another computer, or I've taken that VM, if I'm using a VM, and I've shifted it off to the side. I can keep an eye out on it, but I'm over here doing something else, right? Maybe I'm typing something up in a report, or fixing my next cup of coffee, or whatever it is. So it would be, I wouldn't recommend it, but I wouldn't stop somebody from doing it, right? Like I alluded to at the beginning, it's like watching grass grow. Penetration testing is boring to watch until they get in, and then you watch them screaming and jumping and hollering and all happy, I broke into your system. Okay, that could be exciting, right? But overall, it's very boring to watch somebody perform a test. But if the company isn't willing to let you watch, you might want to, that might be a yellow flag, right? That says, hey, maybe they're not doing something they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, they should give you a valid reason as to why they don't, such as they don't like to take that extra time from the testers to be able to do their job. In your opinion, what should clients and partners demand from their providers moving forward?
I mean, obviously, high quality product is the ultimate demand, right? Communication is important. And it depends on how the partner is positioning themselves within the process, right? So If a partner is a handoff kind of partner, then they should expect from a provider that that provider is going to get all the details necessary to provide their client with the best product possible for the right price, right? And then once they've identified what's needed, then they should expect that partner to perform that test in a high quality manner and provide a high quality report back to the client. If the partner is a middle person where they're fully engaged in the process, they are involved in scoping, they are involved in the mitigation process, they are involved from the beginning to the end to help their client get the best that they should get, then they should expect a lot of communication from their provider as well, right? So a partner should expect a clear understanding of what a product is and what that product provides, and then they should expect clear communication between them and the partner so that the partner can then clearly convey what's going on to the client. They should expect that what the provider says they will perform is performed. I'm talking in circles now. It's like it's a pretty broad question when you think about what should they expect and what should they demand. I'd say the key factor is a partner should expect that a provider is not just there to get the product out quick, down and dirty. The provider should care about the end result for the client. If a client says, I want XYZ, but the client doesn't know that XYZ is not what they need, it's just what they heard they needed. A partner should expect that the provider says, hey, I understand your client wants this, but what they need instead of XYZ is ZYX or ABC. They need to treat it, they need to have a partner. The partner needs a provider that they can trust is going to treat their client's needs as if it were their own, right? Not just as a commodity for a way for me to make money. Yes, you're in the business to make money, but at the same time, you need to have a provider who says, I'm going to treat your network as if it was protecting my grandmother's money, right? I don't want my grandmother to lose her money because I don't want to take care of my grandmother. No, I'm just kidding. I want to protect my family's assets, and I'm going to treat your network as if that's what it's doing, is protecting my network, my family's assets. So yeah, I would say so. If you're a partner and you're looking for a provider, that provider needs to look at your clients as if it was their own network, as if they're protecting their own assets within the confines of the budget that you've allowed them to utilize.
Right. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of the MainNerve Cybersecurity Podcast. As always, we support the Mac Parkman Foundation. And we know penetration testing isn't just another compliance requirement. It's about trust, transparency, and making sure you're getting real value from your investment. If your last test felt rushed, generic, or more like a scan than a simulation, it's worth asking, is my provider cutting corners? At MainNerve, we believe normal should mean thorough, human-led testing that shows real-world impact and helps you get stronger. Until next time, stay secure, stay informed, and remember, simple is powerful.